Hello, everyone there in your own homes. So glad you're able to join us this evening from wherever it is you're calling from, whether it's here in the Portland, Vancouver area, or California, or Canada, or wherever it is you're coming from. So glad to have you here. We're in our fourth month of this series of the night school on angels, which I think each month has surprised us in a different way based on each of the various topics and aspects of the idea of angels we've talked through. Tonight is a very special guest because it's St. Peter Faber, who is our patron saint here at the Faber Institute, where we get the name Faber Institute. And so I believe this is the first time St. Peter Faber has been a guest of ours at the night school. So very special, very honored he would be here with us on this Tuesday evening. I'll keep you all muted for the most part, which probably for the night school, it's a little less discussion than some of our other classes. So we'll stay muted unless there are times when Father Ganz calls us in. But other than that, so glad to have you here, and we will bring Father Ganz and St. Peter Faber in to our evening tonight.
I think what I'd like to do is take from this book, which is a collection of his works published by the Jesuit sources. There's the Memoriale, a book of memories that he has, and I'll be reading from that. And there are some letters and instructions he gives to others doing the ministry in the early days of the Society of Jesus. I'm taking a selection that's taken from April 23rd, which is our day today, but his all the way back in the 1540s. So I'm just going to read a few lines and from him so we hear his voice, and then I'm going to say a prayer to bless the time. So here's something of what he sounds like as he in the Memoriale is talking with himself, but not quite. He's very aware that himself includes God himself abiding in him. In some sense, to talk honestly with himself is to share himself with God who dwells with him in his life, is present with him in his life. But not just God, in Christ in particular through the Holy Spirit, but his guardian angel. So it's a trilogue, not a dialogue. When he's talking with himself, beware that there are these other presences that he was very aware of. So he sounds like this. On the day of St. George the Martyr, that's today, the feast of St. George, one of the patron saints of England, while I was saying Mass in the church of St. Christopher and commemorating the soul of someone not long dead, I felt greatly consoled by a vivid awareness. This is so typical of Faber. He's noticing people with whom I've hung out with, I think might notice how often I use the word notice. What do you notice? This is a key part of Peter Faber, of paying attention to what he reacts to, an awareness that pops open, an insight, a movement of sorrow or lethargy. He's paying attention to these inner states and movements, and he wonders about them. So on this particular day, this feast of St. George, I felt greatly consoled by a vivid awareness of the glory to be conferred on souls by Christ. In a special way, I perceived the generosity shown by him to his own with regard to their labors. for he rewards each one according to the works done out of faith in him. This is his way of saying, isn't it wonderful? Now, you could place yourself in a married relationship. You could place yourself inside a family or a religious community. Isn't it amazing when you do what you do because it's your duty to do it and to do it with all your heart and to do it the best you can? But it's very often our experience that people just assume that. And how unusual it is when someone actually notices what you did. You know that as a spouse, when your spouse notices something and you picked up, like, you did that really well. I loved how you fixed that omelet. Or I love how you handled that argument, with our kids. What he's saying, that his awareness of Christ here is how specifically aware God is, our guardian spirit is, of everything we seek to do with all our heart. God notices that and generously responds. Come, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, bless us, awaken us together as we welcome St. Peter Faber, Heavenly Patron of the Faber Institute, and also our most distinguished board member. Thank you for his beautiful life. Give me the words to share him nobly and sufficiently, and give all the rest of us the ability to meet him and feel the impact of his significant life. Amen. I want to start by sharing a screen and just sort of kind of zoom in on St. Peter Faber as a person first, by placing him, locating him in the world. So I'd like to start here. If you look at the screen and you see this highly complex political map of the south of Europe, and I just want to notice, you see the kingdom, the Ottoman Empire, the Turks, the Muslims over there. You see the Kingdom of Hungary coming in on the water there, the Habsburgs, the Republic of Venice. See how chopped up all of Italy is into all these different republics and duchies. And all the way up to the top and over toward the Kingdom of France, you see the House of Savoy. It's in this area that Peter Faber grew up. This is a heavily mountainous country. This is where the Alps come in here. Beautiful, dramatic landscapes. And this is a chunk of what later became Switzerland. So at the top of the House of Savoy on the map, and just south of the Duchy of Burgundy, you see a lake there, and that's Lake Geneva. So Geneva, Switzerland, was inside Savoy in those days. Okay? Now, if we switch and sort of zoom in on his immediate neighborhood, I'm now showing you a topographical map of his neighborhood. And if you look here and follow my arrow, if you can see it there, as I'm tracing it up that valley, very steep mountains all around. This is the Grand Bornand region. It's a deep valley. And St. Peter Faber grew up, his family, in a small town that lay in this valley, this steep valley. And if you go to the right with me across the map and cross Mont-la-Chat de la Chantillon there, and you come to the other side, you see Chapelle de la Douche, the Chapel of the Duke. And you see a cross over there. That's a Carthusian monastery where Peter Faber had some relatives. They were monks there in the Carthusian monastery. So in the history of Peter Faber's family, there was quite a bit of committed seriously committed Christian followings. That's where Peter Faber came from. So I'm going to jump back out of the share screen here and come back to you. The biography of Peter Faber is really so simple that I can just say it very quickly. He himself would acknowledge that it wasn't a highly complex life. The first part of his life, he spent as a boy growing up in that steep valley, and he was assigned to be a shepherd. And he, like other famous people that turned out to be shepherds, they had lots of alone time and lots of time in a dramatically beautiful landscape. There developed in him an inner stillness, a quietness, but also a largeness of awareness, because he's growing in a geography that expresses a vast beauty. It's not subtle, it's vast and dramatic. And when you become what you contemplate, so if you regularly contemplate majestic mountains, deep valleys, pristine wilderness, animals wild and tame, walking free, you become what you contemplate. You get bigger on the inside. Your soul and imagination is enriched. So we can assume something like this happened in this young boy who, for some reason, in a way that surprised his family, he gained a desire to want to go to school. And his family and relatives, those around him, wondered, why? Why do you want to do that? You have a good family, you have property, you could be a shepherd, we're doing fine, do what we do. But he could not get free from a sincere and deep desire to study, to train his mind. And did he have a beautiful mind? And there came a time where he wept and wept himself to sleep at night, and his parents heard him because he wanted to go to school so much, and he had no means of doing it. His parents wouldn't let him, until finally they relented. So really the first part of his life is the cultivation of this remarkably inwardly vast personality with enormous stillness and depth in it, like the landscape in which he had spent so many years of his young life wandering in, looking after the flocks. And what can often happen with someone who's so deeply and richly developed inside, but who doesn't understand his depth, they can become surprisingly unsure of themselves, because they eventually realize that other people aren't like them. And the way it manifested itself with St. Peter was in a gift he received during this time and a challenge that he received during this time. The gift, and he talks about it often in his early writings, is what he gained from his family and from his life in that landscape was an intense awareness of the reality of God. And he refers to it as the greatest gift of his childhood was to have been given the gift of fear of the Lord, which is actually a very high gift spiritually. We'll talk about the fear of the Lord and why that's a gift in a moment, but I want to insist with you that this is not servile fear. This is not fear of danger. This is a gift of God never becoming merely an idea in his mind, but a God who remained personally, vividly present to him. He felt the presence of God as real. As we've talked about in the Faber sessions in Narnia, one of the dramatic elements of the last battle is when Aslan has been turned into an idea. And he's just an idea. And so people can change their mind and make him be something else as quick as their mind changes, or as quick as they want Aslan to be different. But when you stand before Aslan, the great lion, yourself, all of that nonsense in the mind just kind of evaporates in the presence of the real presence. You see? That is what fear of the Lord means. It's a gift of God never becoming merely an idea, but always a felt presence. So that's the gift. What was the challenge of his youth? Which would take him to an important encounter with an elderly man, 15 years older than he, an Ignatius from the house of Loyola in the Basque Country. The challenge in Peter's soul was intense awareness of how small and limited he personally was in the presence of something as great and vast as God himself. It made him what we call in spiritual language scrupulous. His fear of God could tip into a fear of himself and a fear that he was acting ignobly, that he was acting unworthily before God, because the distinction was so intensely obvious to him between God and God's reality and him, and how small he felt. This was something that vexed and troubled him, and no one knew how to help him with it. Okay. Very quickly, in terms of just the rest of his life, he goes to the University of Paris. He earned the right. He was very smart. He had almost a perfect memory. He could hear a lecture and then repeat it almost verbatim with just one hearing of it. Prodigious memory. That wasn't the only thing. He actually had a brain, so he took what he remembered and thought about it. So very good. He goes to the University of Paris. His college roommate is a young man, exactly his same age, born the same year, 1506. His name, Francis Xavier. And they were roommates for the first years in his first degree at the University of Paris, the greatest university in the Western world at the time. A university made up of 50 colleges, 50 colleges, which usually just meant a particular living place, like an apartment building, that had some professors in it. And they would train and tutor the students who lived in that building. The city of Paris at the time had about 400,000 people, very large city for that time. It was there that after their first degree, and as they were beginning their advanced degree in theology, there came knocking on a door a man also from the Basque Country, like Xavier, who had heard that they had an extra room in their apartment, and he asked if he could stay with them. And thus there began a friendship that would eventually turn into the founding of the Society of Jesus, a friendship between Peter Faber, among three, Peter Faber, Ignatius of Loyola, and Francis Xavier. Their friendship developed, and other students joined them in this growing depth of life and spirituality that Ignatius, who by this time was a significant mystic and a wonderful guide of souls, he helped Peter Faber overcome his scrupulous getting in the way. He helped him navigate and figure out what to do with that. And Ignatius, who was way behind in his studies and not particularly a good student, Peter Faber helped Ignatius with his studies. Eventually, those friends became the Society of Jesus, missioned all over the world. Okay, that's all I'll say about his life. because in some ways that's all he would say about it. But now what I'd like to do is from a biography, move to a different kind of biography, a visual one, and have you take a look at this. I'll go to the share screen and I'll go here. Here. This is the icon of the Faber Institute. It was specially commissioned by my weekly men's group. They commissioned an icon writer who was the college roommate of one of the daughters of the men in my men's group, and she writes icons. They commissioned her to write an icon of St. Peter Faber. And I spent many, many conversations on the phone with her, talking to her about Peter Faber, showing her what he means, and this was the result. What I want you to be able to do, and I'm sorry those who will listen later on audio, you don't have this icon to look at, but I will include it in the text to share so you could pop it up. When you hear the audio, you can look at a copy of it. So as we're looking at it, I just want to point out a couple things. This is another way of getting at a biography of a person, is through an icon, a very spare telling. But there's a great deal that's told in this icon. Let me just point out a couple of things just for the sake of the night school, but I don't want to free you from saying, well, I know what that icon means. An icon is meant, you're supposed to spend time with it because it will reveal things to you that I can't say unless I took a whole hour. I might be able to get to it. So don't miss the opportunity. Obviously, St. Peter Faber standing in the middle, he's our character. He holds in his left hand a book to indicate something of the learning. But it's not just any book. The IHS, the symbol, the first three letters of Jesus' name in Greek, iota, eta, sigma, in capital letters, indicates that this is the spiritual exercises, a way of guiding someone into a deeper personal relationship with Jesus that was built from Ignatius's own experience of being taught by God how to know him. And he carefully building these exercises, believing that the way God had led him to an understanding of God was actually the way God actually brings everyone to get to know him, a sort of signature way by which God gives us the ability to know him better, to see him more clearly, love him more dearly, follow him more nearly day by day. Of all the Jesuits that St. Ignatius knew, he's the founder, the mystic, he said he knew of no one who gave the spiritual exercises, guided people through it better than Peter Faber. He was a master spiritual director. You can see the gentle look on his face. He's looking with unshielded eyes straight at you. In his right hand is a walking staff, because almost his whole apostolic life, which lasted 6 years, he just burned himself out because everyone wanted a piece of him in a very complicated time. We'll talk about what that is in a moment. He walked everywhere, thousands and thousands of miles on foot to do these different works of spiritual formation with people. So the staff indicates that. He's obviously standing on a road. You see churches, 3 of them, indicating 3 of the main cities in which he was sent, in which he did powerful work to heal the Christian church in the West that had torn itself apart in an internal argument that needed to happen. But as people often happen, and you know in married life, sometimes you can fight in ways that aren't fair and you really hurt each other. You really do. And it takes a while to recover. Well, that happened with us, and we're still, but at least our argument only lasted 400 years, so there's hope for all of us. Anyway, you see Peter there. Notice the nimbus around his head, the gold, indicating holiness. But notice it crosses the boundary that holds the picture. So it suggests that part of his holiness was his ability to stand in both worlds. The worlds where the angels worked, the unseen world of these presences, created beings, and the world we live in. And his holiness breaks the plane of the frame, indicating that he moved back and forth with ease. You see, the angels are situated around each of the places where he went to work, symbolized by those 3 churches in the icon. And this will become important, as we'll see later, about how when he came to a town, he was taught by God that each town and each person in the town had a guardian angel. And they're already at work doing the work of God. If he could learn to be in sync with what they're doing and join them in collaborative awareness, the effect for the good would be so much greater. That's why the angels stand around there in each of the spots. And one last thing is, inside the doors of each of the churches, you see a little flame. And that captures, and this is my last comment before continuing, what that captures about Peter Faber is when you live, if you do, in a calamitous age where it's possible that evil and disorder is so loud and is so compelled on your attention every day. Look at me here. Look at me here. Pay attention to me here. Call me. It's just constantly demanding attention. It's possible that you trying to serve and do a good work will serve as a reaction to the disorder you see everywhere, so that the work you do is reactive to the disorder you see. And you say, well, that sounds like a good thing to do. Respond to the problem and fight it. No. The problem with that is our ministry and how we do it and how we understand how we're trying to work for God is so deeply conditioned by the disorder itself, which is defining how we get to approach it. You understand my point? What Peter Faber's insight was, in a certain sense, don't pay attention to the disorder. Look for the spark where God is, where goodness still burns in even the most hateful kind of person. Search for the goodness and serve it. Have your ministry, your desire to help and be of help to God, be focused on the light you see, on the presence of God in even the most calamitous situations. And then what you do will be in accord with the light you find, rather than reactive to the disorder that presents itself. I hope I did that well enough that you understand how significant that is. And this explains something very important about the patron of our institute. We're not unaware of disorder. We must be alert and understand as best we can, not so much the disorder in itself, but why it's here, where it came from. But our attention, following the example of Peter Faber, where is the light in all of this? And be patient and relentless in finding it with the help of the Holy Spirit. Okay. let me just proceed just a little bit more, and then I'm going to pause for a second. We're living as in St. Peter, when we're talking about his world, it reminds me of a famous historical work by the historian Barbara Tuchman. I don't know if you've ever heard of her. What a marvelous historian and beautiful writer of history. She wrote so beautifully and so compellingly and so approachably that her professional historian colleagues thought she was a lightweight because she wasn't writing ponderously, heavily, complexly, which is what they preferred. She really wanted to communicate all her deep learning in a way that was accessible to her readers. And she can write history beautifully. She wrote a book called A Distant Mirror about the 14th century. We're in the 16th century. And her thesis, hidden behind it, it's related, A Distant Mirror is related to a quote, I think, from Shakespeare, is that there were things in the 14th century that really reminded her of the 20th century. And part of the reason she wrote so carefully about the 14th was to give us insight into the 20th when she was writing the book and publishing it, okay? So we hear kind of a distant mirror thing in the time of St. Peter Faber, something that echoes in our time. Let me see if I can describe it through a series of quotes by different scholars of the period coming at it different ways. It was a fearful age. Fear was forward almost everywhere, which is one of the signs that people have lost contact with their souls and they're living too thin in their experiences. And so they're being jerked all sorts of ways and living reactively all the time instead of proactively, positively finding your way. It's always reacting. Fear happens there. Fear is an emotion of pain or uneasiness caused by the sense of impending danger or by the prospect of some possible evil. This was a fearful age that St. Peter Faber lived in Western Europe. One scholar describes it was a tempestuous time for any Christian leader. Christianity itself had just entered a period of intense humiliation. Every major institution of the Catholic Church, and by extension of Western civilization itself, was in a crisis of meaning. Every foundation was being questioned. To be Christian had been a given for nearly every society, large or small, for centuries. But now there was dispute over what that meant. Before, its meaning was simply understood. Even worse, the churches and the institutions that fed them and were fed by them were tagged with the label of corruption. In real terms, Christianity was in ruins. Remember, I'm just quoting different scholars of the period and how they would characterize. Here's another remarkably significant historian of the period, Diarmid MacCulloch. If you study the 16th century, the one we're talking about, you are inevitably present at something like the aftermath of a particularly disastrous car crash. Notice car crash, he's using the image to capture the noise also, that you hear it. So it's not just kind of an idea that you have, but it's something that you physically feel. You know what that's like if you've been present and you've seen a car. There's something that just goes right through you and turns your bowels to water. It's something terrifying. All around are half-demolished structures, debris, people figuring out how to make sense of lives that have suddenly been changed. This is the 16th century. This is the Europe that St. Peter Faber was facing and wondering, how can I be of help to you, God? Another scholar speaks of a deep spiritual malaise. So it means There was genuine spirituality, genuine spiritual interest. But there were no credible teachers who were able to meet them in the spiritual longing they felt that didn't sound like you're trying to sell you something or market you something. There was something that didn't match. And so with the great spiritual interest, there grew a malaise, a kind of melancholy in the spirit that the church and the institutions were not speaking to. They couldn't get at it. This will explain a lot of what people like St. Peter Faber were up to and the Jesuits in this time. Not them alone, but famously them. Also, one last thing about this age, it was an age that grew where superstitions grew. So superstitions is another way of saying maybe a good thing in our time. We'd say it's like QAnon. People just invent stuff and then go with it and then create all this chaos. In those days, it wasn't QAnon, that kind of madness. It was witches and warlocks and werewolves and vampires. There was this really felt sense that these were real presences, and very learned people of the age seriously believed in the presence of them, which probably means that there were people who acted like werewolves and warlocks and witches. That's the only way you get there. You don't just invent it. You see living examples of that. So a werewolf, which means half man, half wolf, which means a kind of person that sometimes seems like normal. But then at other times, there comes out a ravenous desire to tear and consume other people. And werewolves particularly were children, to eat them. This was in their mind. We know this too, right? You've seen people in one moment they seem normal, and then they turn into something very wild and dangerous. Werewolf is kind of the image there. Warlock is a wandering spirit. The key with a warlock is a deceiver. So his joy or her joy is to deceive people because it gives them pleasure to fake them out. Satan, in this regard, is the great warlock, the great deceiver. A witch, the key with a witch and what they were afraid of is they believed that there were people who actually made pacts with the dark power because of the power they felt it gave them and the advantage it gave them over people who were trying to be good. Sometimes you hear, and I don't know if you've heard, but I certainly hear, this idea of witch hunts. Well, maybe there really are witches, So in those days, they really thought like this. They believed these were real presences. But when these are in people's imagination, it scares them, as it scares you and me. How can people be like this and get away with it or whatever we say? It scares us. It was an age of fear that St. Peter Faber worked in. And the last kind of being that they were aware of in their age was the vampire, which is an extortioner. And what it means to extort, which means to take something precious from someone by violence or manipulation or intimidation or abuse or by misusing a legal system. You take what you want. That's the vampiric mode. What is one to do in such a time, in such an age? This is the very age that St. Peter Faber lived in. And what he, very sensitive soul, empowered by the spiritual exercises and the spirituality of the Jesuit order in its early days, they felt a grace to be able to go directly at this and to be of genuine help by following God's lead. Okay. Let me just stop for a moment and just check in. Any comments? Okay, let me proceed. I might wait longer, but again, the night school is mainly, I want to just give you as rich amount as possible. Having described the age in which he lived, here are distinct ways that St. Peter Faber went at this, formed by the spiritual exercises, trained by Ignatius and what St. Ignatius had learned in his own mystical formation. I call it his distinctive way, and there are these ways: virtue, dialogue, humility, addressing the inner turmoil, sweetness of disposition, and last of all, preserving unity of mind and heart. The first one of his distinctive way, virtue. St. Peter Faber, it was very clear to him that the disorder in the world out there, that is the world of news and reporting, it's all that stuff that's so loud, is actually helpful to us because it takes something that's hidden and forces it out in the open and makes it loud enough that we can actually see it. This is based on an insight that goes back to Plato, that the state, or the us in the large sense, the nation, is simply the soul writ large. So people were not aware that the disorder on the large scale was reflective of a disorder that they were in large part responsible for. It was coming from their insides and showing itself on the outside. And so a first instinct of St. Peter Faber is it's a mistake. It will be a waste of time, and it will actually be unhelpful to try to directly fight the calamity. His insight is what we need in people is for everyone to grow in virtue, to build inner strength, know what the virtues are, especially the great four: temperance, justice, fortitude, prudence. Know what they are, what they mean, how to train them in the self and in your children. Build inner strength instead of getting in lines and going out protesting and holding signs. Do your inner work, because the calamity out there is reflective of an unawareness on the inside of people. You get it? Very distinctive, Peter Faber. Next, going from virtue, dialogue. What he means is as you pay attention to what is going on within you, why you desire certain things, why you react so strongly to something and don't react so strongly to other things. What do you care about? What do you hate? What unsettles you? Each of those words are feeling words, affect words that are giving you alerts about a self you don't know very well. I say you, I'm not pointing a finger at you. It's a dialogue, we're pointing at each other on this one. We don't know enough about our inner life. So Peter Faber conducts his dialogue with God and his guardian angel, not by chit-chatting with God and his guardian angel. I mean, what can we really say? We have nothing really interesting to say to such magnificent presences. His dialogue is by offering them his awareness, his self-awareness of his desires, his longings, the movements within him, learning to interpret what those reactions mean, what they're connected with, how they reveal directions that God gives, go this way, warnings that are given, answers, favors, and so forth. That's his way of being in dialogue with God and his guardian spirit, is by paying attention to the way his own being lights up what it's likely that God is doing in his soul for the sake of the world. This is the way, in a homily that Pope Francis gave, he was the one who finally canonized St. Peter Faber. It was almost the very first act he did when he came into the papacy, was saying, I will canonize this guy. He had been blessed for centuries, but never brought to full canonization as a St. Peter Faber. And he did that in January of 2014. I want you to hear how he puts it. And in it, he's going to quote Pope Benedict, his predecessor, who also has something so positive to say about Peter Faber. Here's what he said about this dialogical element in Peter Faber, and that Peter Faber then tried to train in other people. Don't pay attention out there. That will draw you off center. Find the connection to what's happening out there by exploring it within your own soul and learning how to handle it within yourself. Here's the quote from Pope Francis. It was this restlessness that Peter Faber had, a man of great aspirations, another Daniel. And here's Pope Benedict that Francis now quotes. Faber was a modest, sensitive man with a profound inner life. He not only had an inner life, he studied his inner life. He knew what his inner life revealed. He was endowed with the gift of making friends with people from every walk of life. This comes up over and over, this marvelous capacity for friendship that he had. That's stopping the quote from Benedict inside this quote from Francis. Now back to Francis. Yet his was also a restless, unsettled spirit that was never satisfied. Under the guidance of St. Ignatius, he learned to unite his restless, but also sweet, I would say exquisite, sensibility with the ability to make decisions. He was a man with great aspirations. He was aware of his desires. He acknowledged them. Indeed, for Faber, it is precisely when difficult things are proposed that the true spirit is revealed, which moves one to action. An authentic faith always involves a profound desire to change the world. This is not egotistical desire. It means there's a longing that there'll be a grace for everybody, that all will be brought together in unity. It's a fling of a generous longing, is what he means, that profound desire to change the world. In other words, to have the same desire that Jesus had, who came to save us all, not just special people. Okay. Virtue, dialogue, pay attention, learn your own inner life. Third, humility. What we mean here, as I've said, quoted at least once before somewhere, I heard a wise person say to me once about humility. He said, humility is not about thinking less of yourself. Oh, I'm just nothing. I'm no good. Oh, no, I'm not very good. No, that's not what it's about. Humility is not about thinking less of yourself. It is about thinking about yourself less. Humility at the heart of it is the ability to be preoccupied with other people, to care, attend to other people, and not be self-preoccupied. Not attend to them because it makes me feel good. Not attend to them so maybe they'll attend to me. No. It's the ability, the interior freedom to let go of self-preoccupation and simply desire to dwell in the other and to be present to them. It's the heart of friendship. Humility is a key element in the heart of friendship. The ability to stand present to the other as other and to be content there. Fourth point about his way, addressing the inner turmoil. I've already talked about this, but I would say one scholar puts it this way. St. Peter saw clearly what both the emperor and the high ecclesiastical leaders could not or would not see. That what Germany needed, so we're talking about Germany because Peter Faber did an important piece of work in Germany. What Germany needed was not discussions with heretics, which is the strong word for those who are part of us. It's all us fighting with ourselves. So the people who were, yeah. It was not discussions, learned gatherings. What was needed was a reformation in the life and discipline of Catholics, both clergy and lay people. Again, you hear this instinct of Peter Faber. Instead of being distracted, because that's what it is, in being angry and fighting the calamity, and I hate those people, and this is what they're doing, and run them out, and all that stuff. It's all a distraction. Is go to work on yourself, because a lot of that calamity out there is inside you and me. Address the inner turmoil and own it is a strong instinct in Peter Faber. The next part of Peter Faber's way, this is just the last two, sweetness of disposition. You can't make yourself sweet, but it's possible by being attending to others, by being attentive and aware of God's presence within, that God will share with you and me a central aspect of his divine character, which is his capacity to charm. I often call it the courtesy of God. To charm, in the bad sense, means to kind of do magic tricks. It gets close to casting spells. The other meaning of it is, and the one I'm meaning here, is to influence, to enthrall, to powerfully attract or engage someone with beauty, sweetness of vision, to fascinate them, captivate, to delight them. It's one of God's greatest qualities. And Peter Faber had this. So he proposed things that seem preposterous. The great, quote, enemies of the Catholic Church. Remember, it's all us fighting among ourselves as Christians. But, the Lutheran bad guys or the Presbyterian bad guy or whatever. Peter Faber's instinct was, instead of railing against them and writing learned tracts tearing apart their misguided insights, Peter Faber consistently asked for permission to go meet them personally and to spend time with them. Because how can you possibly know what someone means if you can't learn to stand inside them, which you can only do through their gift to you of trust? Why they see what they see. This is the charm, the beautiful sweetness. One of his contemporaries, one of the original founders of the Jesuit order, put it this way around Peter Faber, quote, "I am at a loss for words to express the way in which, by his lovable and pleasing manner, Peter earned everyone's goodwill and affection, and won all who met him to the love of God." Notice, not to the love of him, not to the love of Catholics, to our side. No, to win them to the love of God, who's greater than all of this. Further, he's quoting, "When he spoke of divine things, it was as though he had the keys of people's hearts on his tongue. So powerfully did he move and attract them. And the love he inspired was equaled by the reverence they had for the sweet gravity and firm virtue which informed all he said." Classic Peter Faber. The last point about the distinctive way of Peter Faber, and then we'll have to stop because we stick to our hour, is this. Peter Faber wrote a letter to one of his fellow Jesuits, and he put it this way, and he's going to refer to the enemy. Tellingly, for Peter Faber, the enemy is never other people, ever. He said an enemy who's another person is simply someone that I'm using my language, not his. He's more gentle. He's holier than I am. What enemy, when you refer to another person as an enemy, it expresses a deep laziness in you for not showing that person the respect to actually know them and understand them on the inside. What he means by the enemy, Peter Faber, is always Satan, the enemy of human nature. Quote, "However, the enemy has often learned to his hurt," this is Satan, "how great a good is peace and union of hearts among those who in Christ bind themselves to each other as members of one body. And so he, Satan, bends every effort and ingenuity to attack the unity, attempting by spreading his tares." That's a quote from the weeds, the tares and the wheat. So sowing bad seeds to grow weeds in the wheat. By spreading his tares, Tares, to overwhelm the fruitful seed and to pull up, scatter, and destroy those whom God has linked together. Peter Faber is saying, if you're arguing with people, trying to win them to Christ, and you're willing to sacrifice unity and peace, you're not doing God's work. You have to be willing to fight in a way that maintains friendship, that holds unity of mind and heart, that cares about courtesy and kindness and will not let that go in the argument. For Peter Faber, that's the godlike way of doing it and what he was most famous for. And I'll finish with something he wrote to another fellow Jesuit. Anyone wanting to help the heretics, it's language we don't use today, but it means people that you profoundly disagree with. Anyone wanting to help the heretics of this age must be careful to have great charity for them, to really care about them, really, and to love them in truth. It doesn't mean you overlook the wretchedness that they are, the wrongness that they may have. It doesn't mean you overlook it, but you care more for their, to use the medieval language, their immortal soul, created by God and loved by God. You care more for that than the crazy things they say and hurtful things they say. You must be careful to have great charity for them, banishing from the soul all considerations that would tend to chill one's esteem for that other person. And to finish, we need to win their goodwill so that they will love us and accord us a good place in their hearts. Wow. What a beautiful spirit, and what a difficult thing to do. And you know it, right? Give me just a moment. Take, Lord, receive all our liberty, our memories, our understanding of them, and our entire will. Whatsoever we have or hold on to, you have given to us. We give it all back to you and surrender it wholly to be governed by your will. Give us only your love and your grace, and we are rich enough, and ask for nothing more. Amen. Oh gosh, I hope I did that well enough. I so wanted you to meet him in a way that was compelling. Anyway, back to you, Mary.
I would say that was quite an introduction, whether you know Peter Faber yet or not. That was your first taste. It was wonderful, and I think a message that we all needed to hear and can resonate with us in this day and age. The idea of the night school is you'll take pieces of what you heard and either continue those conversations with those that you've joined this class with tonight, or continue your learning on this person of Peter Faber and this idea of how he thought about angels. Continue on with that and whatever it is that stuck with you or might have spoken to you this evening, because goodness knows it can't all actually really be fit into an hour. So continue on with those thoughts on the topic this week. Thank you again for being here. Next month, May, is our final night school class on the subject of angels. And Father Ganz, that topic is on Mr. God.
This
Is
is Anna.
Anna.
It's a remarkable little book. One of the things I didn't get to as well, and I just, I just feel overwhelmed, and I just wish so much for you guys. Is how what I wanted to get to you a sense of is with Peter Faber and then with Anna, Mr. God, This is Anna, that novel, kind of it's hard to know if it's a novel. It's supposed to be a real story about a real little girl, about how the angelic beings are not, well, our guardian spirits don't live outside of us, as in behind us or around us. They actually dwell within us. They abide in us and support us in our longings and desires from the inside and encourage us to follow God. Well,
So that will be
that's
the
next.
third Tuesday of May, May 21st, and that will conclude this series on angels with the night school. And between now and then, for those of you who are local to Portland, Tara Ludwig, who's on this call, she will be leading our annual Mother's Retreat the Saturday before Mother's Day. Details are on our website. I'll include it in the follow-up email that's sent out tomorrow. And we hope you have a wonderful rest of your week. Say goodbye as you leave, and thanks for joining tonight. Good night.
Good night.
Good
Good
night,
night.
everybody. So nice to
Thank
have you here.
you.
Hey, Cam,
Thank-
welcome in from Wisconsin. Great to see you. Nice to have you.